21-day lockdown. What can landlords do during this unprecedented time to support their tenants? On our previous podcast of Know Your Tenant Rights, we focused on the call for a moratorium on evictions and the decisive execution taken by the presidency to respond to a call by 27 organizations and social movements. Welcome to our second podcast. We'll be looking into the role landlords can play during this period to assist with flattening the curve by halting evictions. I'm your host, Zakaria Mashede. Joining us on this episode to share some insightful information regarding the payment holiday is Danielle Louw. Danny is an attorney from Ndifuna Ukwazi. Welcome, Danny.
Hi, Zach. Thanks for having me.
Now, Danny, what do regulations under the Disaster Management Act stipulate about the execution of evictions during the lockdown? Is it an illegal practice?
Yes, so the regulations expressly provides that all evictions are suspended with immediate effect for the duration of the lockdown. So sheriffs who execute eviction orders have also been instructed to not carry out any evictions during this period. This means that if a landlord tries to carry out an eviction during this lockdown, it will constitute an illegal eviction. The tenant should tell their landlord that they are not complying with the COVID-19 regulations and that they could be arrested and/or fined. If the landlord continues enforcing the tenant out of the premises, the police should be called and informed that the landlord is not complying with the regulations and that they should come out to stop the landlord from carrying out the eviction.
What happens when a tenant cannot afford to pay their rent during the lockdown?
Yes, so because of the lockdown, thousands of people are now unable to work and are not earning an income. So this will affect their ability to pay their rent. So if you are a tenant and you are unable to pay your rent, it is important to try to talk to your landlord to come to an alternative payment arrangement. Some practical examples of alternative payment arrangements include, for instance, asking your landlord to utilize your deposit to pay for this month's rent, or asking to pay a reduced amount for rent during this lockdown period. In some cases, landlords may even agree to not charge you any rent during this period, and that you can pay the outstanding rent off a little bit at a time after the lockdown. So it is very important to try to engage your landlord in good faith. You will never know unless you try. But we know that not all landlords are friendly or approachable, so it will be important for you to choose how you want to proceed.
So, Danny, should the tenant and landlord be unable to reach an agreement and the landlord insists that the tenant must pay rent, or they will cancel the lease, what happens then?
Yes, it is important to remember that even if you cannot pay your rent, you cannot be evicted during this lockdown period. In the event that you as tenant and the landlord can't come to an agreement, and the landlord then wants to cancel your lease, it is important to know a few things. Firstly, the landlord has to validly cancel your lease. If your lease agreement is covered by the provisions of the Consumer Protection Act, the landlord has to give you 20 days written notice of cancellation. They can't just decide to cancel it immediately. If they cancel it validly, you will have the opportunity then to tell your landlord that you object to the cancellation of your lease because you consider it unfair given the circumstances. It is then important to refer the matter to the Rental Housing Tribunal. You can then lodge an online complaint against your landlord with the Rental Housing Tribunal, stating that there has been an unlawful cancellation of your lease agreement. You as tenant would have to be able to show that the payment of rent could not take place because of circumstances beyond your control, and that because of this, it would amount to an unfair practice to allow the cancellation of the lease. If there is a specific force majeure clause in the lease, you may also be able to rely on this clause to say that the lease was not lawfully cancelled. There is further the potential of relying on what is called the legal doctrine of supervening impossibility to argue that the cancellation of the lease is unlawful. You as the tenant would need to show that you are unable to earn money to pay rent because of the COVID-19 regulations. It would also be important for you to show that you properly communicated your situation to the landlord and tried to come to an agreement, but that no agreement could be reached. If a tenant cannot lodge an online complaint, It is advisable that the complaint be lodged in person at the Rental Housing Tribunal offices once they open after the lockdown. It is important that tenants do this as soon as possible and before the landlord launches an eviction application. The landlord can only do this in any event after the lockdown period. Should the landlord launch an eviction application before the tenant is able to refer the dispute to the Rental Housing Tribunal, the tenant will still have an opportunity to put their facts before the court during the eviction process.
Now, to help us understand what happens if there's no rental payment and the landlord needs it to keep up with their bond, where do we call on banks to assist?
Yes, Zach. So where a landlord has a mortgage to pay and they are concerned that they won't be able to pay it, it is important that the landlord approach their respective financial institutions and find out what options they have. For instance, ABSA implemented a payment relief program which is applicable to home loans, i.e. mortgages. This allows clients who are in good standing with the bank to either continue paying if they can or to defer their payment for a period of 3 months. First National Bank has announced a similar relief program.
Well, thanks for joining us, Danny.
It's a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me, Zach.
Well, listeners, there's a legal support hotline to contact public interest law organizations for potential rights violations during the lockdown. The number is 066 076 8845. That is 066 076 8845. Thank you for joining us. Till next time.